We are ready for the NFL draft. Yes, I know we are still 141 days away from day one of the 2025 NFL draft, but for so many NFL draft hopefuls, their season is done, which means their fall film grade is now locked in. NFL teams will start getting together in December to go over their front board, their back board, and start to develop a plan for those guys they still have more questions on. Now is also the time we will start to have clarity on all those underclassmen who will apply for special eligibility into the draft. So 141 days along with you, we cannot get enough of draft coverage. And that is why we will today talk with our friend and draft analyst over from ESPN, Reid, here on Scouting the League. Hey everyone, and welcome back to Scouting the League. Fired up to talk players with Jordan. First, a quick message to all the scouts we have tuning in out there. If you haven't seen it yet, some stuff I've put out on X, a new project I am working on, getting scouts together. Alongside Neil and Inside the League, I'm hoping to develop a network, a community, a conglomeration, if you will, of NFL scouts that will provide the support as a whole that is largely missing within our scouting community, from contract review, salary information across the league, scout mentorships, financial planning, guidance, so much more. You can call it an egg that I am trying to hatch in my brain, something that has not existed in the scouting community that I want to bring to you, something that I think will help every scout out there. But I need some help. Hit me up, whether via text message, DM me on Twitter, on X, go to my pages at RightStepADV, send me a message on my website, rsafootball.com. Every conversation will remain completely confidential, but will hopefully be of benefit to you in the end. Again, if there's an element of something in the scouting world that you think something like this could address, let me know. I want to be someone working for scouts. Scouting is what I love to do. For reasons we all know, I am out of the league, working on my own. But again, I want to be here for you. So when you are done with that, make sure you also head over, like, subscribe, and share this podcast wherever you are listening. If you are watching on YouTube, we have plenty of prospect highlights in that video this week. Make sure you subscribe over there. Let us know what you like, what you agree with, or what we think we got totally wrong. Of course, I am Rodrik David at RightStepADV on X. rsafootball.com is my website where you can find everything on my end. Joined, as always, by Neil Stratton, the best co-host in the business. Neil is at Inside the League on X, and his website is InsideTheLeague.com. Make sure you are also checking out his blog, SucceedInFootball.com. And if you are not yet, make sure you sign up for his Friday Wrap newsletter. Head to his website, his X page, to get all of that done. And the man you are all here to hear, Jordan Reid. Jordan, the North Carolina Central signal caller that will have some excellent insight on these quarterbacks. A man that is used to the big stage, yet is humble enough to join us on Scouting the League. Jordan, welcome back to Scouting the League.
Thank you guys for having me. Two of my favorites. I always love talking ball with each and every one of you guys. So excited to be back once again.
Yeah, well, you're just like us, where again you probably never tire of talking ball, talking prospects, especially again we're 141 days from the NFL draft. Yet, I mean, it feels like it is full steam ahead, pedal to the metal. It is remarkable what the NFL draft is nowadays. Again, it allows us to get on and actually talk about it. So, it's a fascinating time, and yet we still have 141 days. It's a lot of time, a lot still to be sorted out. I want to start. Let's hit a quick question from this weekend. Rivalry games. Again, there's teams that are playing for everything. Teams that, again, it's not going to affect their stock. But again, from a scouting perspective, from maybe I'd even call it an old school perspective, I used to hear scouts like, if you don't perform in your rivalry game, then I don't want you on my team because you have to show up in those rivalry games. Was there anybody that hurt or really helped their stock just before we jump into individual players coming off some of these big rivalry games and rivalry upsets?
Well, I just finished the Michigan and Ohio State games, and I was blown away by the defensive tackle pairing of Mason Graham and Kenneth Grant. Both of those guys were exceptional in that one. And yes, I know Ohio State was down a couple of interior guys, but we can't blame them for that or, kind of criticize them for that just because they can't control who's in front of them. So we're grading them based off of the players that they're in front of. And guys that are projected to be first round picks, you want to see them look like first round picks in those rivalry type games and throughout the season as well. So both of those guys I thought were extremely, extremely impressive.
Yeah. Graham intrigues me. It's interesting that you brought him up, Jordan. Do you see? Is he a complete defensive tackle? Can he play the run as well as the pass? Is he that kind of player, or does he kind of lean one way or the other more?
No, I think he's a dual threat. He's very strong at the point of attack. He has very quick hands along the interior. Now, he's not some of those interior guys that we have seen in years past. Like, I don't think he's like Quinnen Williams or guys in that tier, but a top 10 pick, top 10 to 12 pick, I definitely think he's worthy of that. But especially in a defensive class like this, especially a class that doesn't have that high-end talent at the top of the draft, I wouldn't be shocked if he goes in the top 5 to 7.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he's
okay.
again, it's a fun pairing.
And again, we do our mock draft kind of scan, and he's a guy that really is moving up, and I can't take that for what it's worth. But it's intriguing to kind of watch his art. He does seem to be a guy that's on the rise.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, Jordan, you're a former quarterback. The most difficult position to evaluate, to project, is that quarterback spot, and yet it is the most important position in all of sports. What, if any, advantage being a former quarterback do you have? The mental side, the decision making, the stuff that is hard to see, hard to work through just putting on the tape. Do you think you have an advantage? And kind of talk through what you're really looking at beyond just the traits, the throws, the completion percentage when you're watching some of these top quarterbacks.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think absolutely it is an advantage just because I've been in that pocket. I've been able to see the concepts that they're running from field level, and then I've been in their shoes. Now, I didn't play a high level of football, FBS football, but as far as the stuff that they're trying or attempting to run or throw, I've definitely been in those situations. So, for example, two guys we'll talk about here quickly, Cam Ward and also Shedeur Sanders. So some of the things that may be a positive or a negative on their scouting report, I'm able to easily see those things just because I'm able to assess the position and I can put myself in their shoes. Like, for an example, maybe they threw an interception here and I could put myself in their shoes like, hey, what possibly were they thinking on this throw? Or what made him throw that? Or what could have been some situations where they could have avoided that? So what I try to do when I'm evaluating these quarterbacks is just try to put myself in their shoes and grade the positives and the negatives on that scale.
Yeah. I've been fascinated. Kurt Warner, obviously a former quarterback that took the hard road to the NFL. He's been putting out some unbelievably good stuff that it really, again, changes the way you think about, again, an interception, a completion, a touchdown, because, again, obviously being a former quarterback and doing it as much with his mind as he did his physical traits and his progression through the years, he really does a good job forcing it. Hey, quarterbacks have to think about, again, a pressure plan, a hot route, a hot plan. Again, what you're seeing pre-snap. I would highly encourage everybody to go out there. Kurt, I've messaged him. I would love to have him on here just to talk about the intricacies of the game because he's doing a really good job of that. But Jordan, with quarterbacks, when you're doing a round-based system, when you're doing a top 50, top 100, whatever it is, you've called it the quarterback tax. Quarterbacks that are really graded by NFL teams really into the third round are going to be first-round quarterbacks. Again, from last year, maybe a Bo Nix, a J.J. McCarthy, those guys that got taken 10 to 15 to 20. Again, all else held equal, it's probably equivalent to a late second round, maybe a third round grade. Those quarterbacks are getting taken in the first round. So when you start thinking about these QBs, the decision-making process, everything that goes into it, they're going to get pushed up. So with there not being a consensus this year, who's your QB1? Does he belong at that top premier, probably a top 5 spot, based on what he actually is, or is it just the priority of the position? Let's go ahead and go. Quarterback 1.
Well, Rodrik, you would know this having been in an NFL building before of how nothing matters in a rebuild or roster construction until you get that quarterback spot right. But when you do hit on that position, it changes everybody's lives in the building from top to bottom. So that's why we see some of these guys pushed up the board, or there's such a priority with the quarterbacks. Now, with this year, what I think is really interesting is that, excuse me, the supply is not going to meet the demand of positions. And if you look at some of the teams in the top 10 right now, look at the Raiders, are an obvious team that needs a quarterback. I think Tennessee is going to eventually need one. The Giants are another. I just named 3 teams. And in my opinion, there's only 2 quarterbacks right now that I will be comfortable with taking in the first round, which is Cam Ward of Miami, who is my top-ranked quarterback, as well as Shedeur Sanders of Colorado. So what's going to be really interesting to me in this draft class is who is that third guy that gets pushed up the board like we see every year? Is it going to be Jalen Milroe of Alabama? Is it going to be Carson Beck of Georgia, a guy who was seen as a potential number 1 overall pick candidate coming into the season? Or is it going to be somebody like a Quinn Ewers, or Drew Aller of Penn State is another guy I could see climbing boards late as well. So what I'm going to be paying really close attention to in this class is who's going to be that third guy that emerges throughout the process.
Based on this, now, Rodrik already talked on the importance of this past weekend. What happened this weekend that may have moved those guys in any direction? Obviously, Shedeur had a big game against a lousy opponent. Cam lost the game that they were expected to win. The Carson Beck played a lousy first half, but he played a nail second half. Quentin Ewers threw a pick 6 in a game where Texas A&M really didn't have offense the whole time. What were your takeaways from this weekend? How did guys move, on your board?
Outside of those top 2, honestly, it's been a roller coaster ride for all of those guys.
Yeah.
And even Cam and Shedeur, it's been a bit of a roller coaster in some games for them. But I think they've been the most steady of all of these quarterbacks in this class. But this is not the quarterback class that we saw last year. I don't think we have any high-end talent like with Caleb Williams, Jaden Daniels, Drake May. I don't think there's any type of that caliber of quarterback in this class. But with Cam Ward and Shedeur, I think they can be good starters in the NFL. But outside of those 2, it's been a roller coaster. And I'll start with Carson Beck. He actually was my top-ranked quarterback coming into the year. And there was a lot of promise about Beck coming into the year. And if you go back and you watch his tape from last year, I thought he did a really good job of getting rid of the ball, playing on time, and I thought his decision-making was very good. But something that you're really starting to see with him this year is that if you take away some of those, what I call A-level parts around him, whether it's Brock Bowers and Ladd McConkey, we're really starting to get an assessment of Carson Beck and if he can be that guy that can uplift or withstand having poor surroundings. Just because we all saw the Georgia Tech game, their wide receivers are not very good at all at Georgia this year. So I think something we're really starting to see with Carson Beck is, can he be that quarterback that can withstand having poor surroundings? And that's really my big question about him on the next level, just because if he does go to a bad team or a team that's going through a rebuild, can he be that quarterback that can withstand those poor surroundings while he does develop like we're seeing with Drake May in New England, who I think is doing a heck of a job despite having poor surroundings. I just have questions on if Carson Beck can be that guy on the next level.
Mm-hmm. Okay,
Stepping back, again, going QB1 and 2, Carson and Shedeur. Again, we've seen it, I don't know how many years now, it's become the norm, 1 and 2. Number 1 overall, number 2 overall, and you're going to trade whatever you have to do to get up there. Are we in a year this year where it's like, hey, no, if I'm a quarterback needy team, again, one of those teams you mentioned, I'm going to sit at 4, at 5. Hey, if this franchise guy that I like falls to me, great. Or am I leveraging my future next year's 1 to go and get these guys? Do you think there's going to be enough conviction on either of those guys to make that move?
I think there's going to have to be, just because I think it's super risky for you to stay at 3 or 4 and risk another team coming up to 1 or 2 and jumping you to get the guy that you may have as your quarterback 1 or quarterback 2. And there's going to be a lot of split between Cam and then also Shedeur. And some teams may not even have those guys at their top 2. We will never know all 32 teams' boards or those quarterback-needy teams in their board. But I just don't think you can risk waiting at 3 or 4 for a quarterback to fall for you, just because we just talked about how important that quarterback position is. And I just look at the team like the New York Giants. I think their seats right now are flaming hot, and I'm hoping they survive. But let's say they do survive what's happening this year, I just don't see how they can wait if they do or they stay at 3 or 4 and hope that Shador or Cam falls to them. And that's why if you're a team that doesn't need a quarterback like Jacksonville, you're hoping you get that number 1 overall pick so that team could come up and give you that huge haul of picks to trade up for one of those 2 guys.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. With Shador, for me, the big question is decision-making. It's highlight, flash plays. He shows that he can move in the pocket. He can read a defense. He can play in a structured environment. But then there's all those plays where it's like, why are you holding it here? Why are you trying to make too much out of this? Is that the biggest question teams are going to have through the pre-draft process is mentally, where are you at and can you handle an NFL playbook?
Yeah, I think so. I think just the delayed timing of his decisions. I think Shador is capable of playing on time consistently, but he just does not do it for some reason in that Colorado offense. He's a player that he can make plays outside of structure. Now, he's never going to be mistaken for his dad as an athlete ever. He's just not nearly that caliber of athlete, but just how he just takes some unnecessary sacks by holding on to the ball when he can get rid of it. I think that's something that he has to improve on the next level. Now, as far as the ball placement, the overall decision-making as a whole, I think he's outstanding in that department. The physical traits are not going to overwhelm you about him. I think he has enough arm strength. That's why I compared him to a guy like a Geno Smith, who ended up being a second-round pick coming out of West Virginia. And now there's a lot of teams that would love to have Geno Smith as a starter throughout the league. So I think that's a player he compares very favorably to and who I think he can turn into on the next level.
Good. Again, his toughness, again, you talk about the yes. questions with his mental, the toughness also stands out in an absolutely positive way. And again, the hope, and I think something that I have seen his progression from 23 to 24, the toughness is there and his leadership using that toughness. Again, you see the teammates rally behind him. Again, maybe you want him to take some of the comments back that he's made at different times. Again, hopefully he's going to grow into that. Hopefully an NFL team puts him behind that. So let's talk about Cam Ward now. What is his, again, dominant trait? He can make every throw. He's got a little bit different throwing motion, but again, there's plenty of guys that can do that. What is the thing for Cam through the process that's going to either separate him as QB1 or maybe keep it tight through the process?
So what really separated the two for me, I just think the physical traits with Cam are better. Now, he's not as polished as Shador from the pocket, in my opinion. But as far as him being an electric playmaker, that's something that I love about Cam Ward. And he throws the ball kind of like a shortstop. He can throw from all those different arm angles that we're seeing a lot of the top quarterbacks make in the NFL today. But what I love the most about Cam is that you cannot phase him. Like his demeanor, his poise, his ability to come back late in the fourth quarter. Sometimes it is his own doing, and sometimes it's the defense of Miami's doing. But just the poise that he plays with, I always feel some sense of hope when he's back there. And we've seen it in plenty of games this year, whether it was Virginia Tech, Cal, and even though they lost that Georgia Tech game, when they entered that last drive, I felt like he was going to engineer the ball down the field and give them a chance to win that game. So, and I've compared Cam to Jordan Love when he was coming out of Utah State. And if you remember, he was a very polarizing prospect just because of the turnovers. And with Cam, the turnovers is something that you're just going to have to live with him. It's something that has been in his game since he was at Incarnate Word and then moved on to Washington State. He's just going to have 2 or 3 plays within the game where you just scratch your head like, man, what the hell was he thinking on those throws? But in between those plays, there's going to be 9 or 10 that make you stand up in your seat and just say, wow, with him. So I would rather take my chances, especially in a quote-unquote down quarterback class. I would go for the home run swing and hope to coach some of those things out of Cam as far as being a playmaker and try to limit some of those turnovers as opposed to going with Shador, who I think is going to be a good quarterback. But I would just go with the upside of Cam. That's really the differentiator, the separator between the two for me.
Yeah.
If you are – okay, let's go to a guy that just fascinates me because last year – when Rodrik and I didn't have guests, we were sitting here talking about Quinn Ewers this time of year and wondering kind of exactly where he fit into things. Let's play. I'm going to say you are Quinn Ewers' advisor. Do you tell him, number one, stay at Texas for another year and go to war with Arch Manning and see if you can win the job and really take a step forward under Sarkisian in that offense? Do you transfer, try to find a better fit, maybe go somewhere and try to reinvent
Hey,
yourself.
Ohio State may take him back now.
Yeah, especially after last week. Or do you go to the draft and in a kind of a muddy quarterback position, hope you have a great 3 months and maybe show people that you can be that guy and kind of, cash your fortunes to the wind and hope that maybe you slide into the first round. If you're Quinn Ewers' advisor, what do you tell him, Jordan?
That's a great question. And I've had a chance to see Quinn live 2 times this year when I was working for ESPN Radio. I called, 1 time, sorry, the Mississippi State game, which he did not start. Arch actually started in that game. So my first time seeing him live was against Kentucky a couple of weeks ago. And if I'm Quinn's advisors, I would tell him to go to the NFL just because if I put myself in the shoes of Steve Sarkisian, Quinn Ewers just cannot come back because I'm not going to risk losing Arch Manning to the transfer portal, especially when I have potentially 3 more years with him as a redshirt sophomore and hope that Quinn can eventually figure it out. So going back to Texas, I just don't think that's an option for him just because I just don't see how Sark would start him again over Arch Manning and potentially risk losing Arch. I just don't see that as an option. Transferring, I mean, it could be an option, but I just don't see that as a possibility for him just because he seems so loyal to Texas and he loves Texas so much, especially after leaving Ohio State. So you would hope he can figure it out in the NFL, and I know that's a very tall task, but I would take my chance, especially in once again, a quote-unquote down quarterback class. You're hoping a team eventually falls in love with what he showed early on in the season, especially against Michigan. You're trying to sell that's exactly who he is and who he could be on the next level.
Yeah.
Right now, gun to head, Jordan, who goes higher in the draft, Carson Beck or Quinn Ewers?
I would say Carson Beck, just because he's been more consistent this year. And I think what he has in his back pocket, Carson has in his back pocket, is that you can sell the 23 tape and say, hey, this is what I look like when I have adequate surroundings. But in 24, even though I got off to slow starts and I had a slump with my decision making, I battled my tail off in the second half. And I think over these past 3 games, Beck has shown some of the stuff that a lot of scouts were excited about coming into the year, but he finishes games strong. And I'll go back to that game against Alabama of where he stunk it up in the first half. But the second half, he was absolutely nails. And then once again, in the Georgia Tech game, he wasn't great in the first half. But the second half in those overtimes, I thought he played great.
Yeah. It's the Quinn Ewers conversation is an interesting one because to your point, Arch has not been a full season starter, but in Sark's offense, with 1 good year, it may be deuces for him, and he may be QB1 in 2026. So again, banking on 3 more years, so you'd love to do it, but again, with him, it's probably a 1-year thing. You get those 2 guys, Sark's in a good spot. He's going to bring in another quarterback. So again, ultimately, Texas will be fine. Carson Beck, he's in that next group. Carson Beck, Drew Aller, Garrett Nussmeier. Again, we've seen Carson do it at a really high level with a good team. Nussmeier, fascinating thrower of the football. He's one of those guys like Joe Milton where, hey, put on just a t-shirt and go out there and throw. It's like, this guy might be QB1 based on those metrics. Drew Aller may be a close second. Ideal height, ideal in the pocket, again, can make every throw. Separate those quarterbacks. What's going to be the big thing for them, and what do you think could separate those guys? Maybe QB 3, 4, 5 in that group.
Yeah, I'll just start with Nussmeier, and I have an opportunity to see him twice live this year against South Carolina and against Alabama. So I've seen him at his best and I've seen him at his worst. But as far as the details of playing the position from a footwork and a mental standpoint, he's very sharp in that aspect. A quarterback that he knows where to go with the football. I think his accuracy can be good at times. But as far as his footwork and then just his ability to avoid pressure in the pocket, I think that's where he is very good. And you have to remember, he is the son of a coach, so his IQ is very, very high as far as where to attack defenses, understanding how to get the ball out on time and where to go with it. But things just really haven't worked out in his favor this year, in my honest opinion. I think he does need to go back to school, but just try to improve on that aspect just because with LSU's offense, they don't take a lot of deep shots down the field just because I don't think he has a super strong arm. He's another similar to Shedeur of where the physical traits are really not going to overwhelm you as far as the arm power or the arm strength down the field. It isn't like a Drew Aller, or a Jalen Milroe those guys that just have powerful arms. He definitely isn't that. So if I was his advisor, I would encourage him to go back to school. And then with Drew Aller, he's the opposite end of the spectrum. Very powerful arm, good size, 6'5", 240 pounds. But I think he does need to go back to school, in my opinion. But I think he does end up coming out just because what his advisors or the people in his corner are probably going to tell him is that, hey, it's a down quarterback class. You have the size that people look for. And that P word, potential, is something NFL scouts absolutely fall in love with. So we have a quarterback that's super raw, in my opinion, but he's 6'5", 240 pounds, has a very strong arm, and we've seen the year-over-year improvement with him. I think he's right at 73 or 74% completion percentage right now, but he was in the high 50s a year ago. So the new offensive coordinator there at Penn State has done a heck of a job with him, and I think there's a lot of teams that could fall in love with that one-year sample size. And we know NFL teams love those big stature quarterbacks as well. We saw with Anthony Richardson, of course. Aller's not nearly the athlete that Richardson was, but just from a stature and arm strength standpoint, I think they're very similar.
Okay, we got to talk about my guy, all right, my hometown kid. If Jalen Milroe has a perfect January, February, and March, how high can he get in this draft class?
That's a great question. He's another I've seen multiple times so far this year. I've seen him at his worst and I've seen him at his best. I was there for the Tennessee game, which he did not play very well in, and I was there for the LSU game, which I thought was one of his better ones as a thrower and specifically as a runner as well. Now, entering the league, I think he's going to be one of the most dynamic runners at quarterback without question. I think he's on par with Lamar Jackson, Jaden Daniels, all those guys from just a running perspective. But as a thrower, I still think he has some work to do, specifically in the short to underneath areas of the field, just because with Jalen right now, with Jalen, he's very similar to Jalen Hurts when he was coming out of Oklahoma. Now, I don't even think he's as polished as what Jalen was coming out, but you can see some of the flashes with Milroe. But with him, he's more of a see it, throw it guy right now, and you just want him to anticipate a little bit more with him. I think that's an area where he does have to improve. But with Milroe, if you do draft him, you have to go all in on his skill set. And what I mean by that is you have to build a power-based oriented offense like what Baltimore does with Lamar Jackson, of where you're just going to overwhelm people, where you have a mixture of quarterback design runs, you take some selective shots down the field. And if you're comfortable with him attacking those short to intermediate areas as a passer, you can start to incorporate that as he gets comfortable with the playbook. So the team that does draft Jalen Milroe, you have to go all in with this skill set. He's not a guy you want dropping back to pass 35 to 40 times a game. That's just not his game. But if you incorporate some quarterback design runs, some shots down the field, and then a mixture of the short to intermediate area type throws, I think you'd be satisfied with him. But it is going to take some time for him to develop just because he is not polished as a passer right now.
Jordan, Lamar Jackson, obviously he's changed a lot of, the way teams view prospects like Jalen. I did a pro scouting advanced on a young Lamar Jackson, and the throwing was, for all the throws that he can make, and again, he can make every throw, it was the ones that he missed that just drove you crazy. And I know he missed 2 throws. The Ravens ended up beating my Falcons that year, and he missed 2 throws, and the game's not even close. Who's a more polished passer, say, entering the NFL draft? Lamar Jackson with where he was coming out of Louisville, or Jalen Milroe now coming out of Alabama?
That's a great question. I think Lamar was more polished, honestly. The thing with Lamar is that he was a fantastic athlete, but the reason for his inaccuracies when he was coming out of Louisville was more so of a lower body mechanics or base type thing. And just I'm having flashbacks with Lamar and just trying to remember some of the things I had on my report about him. I just think his base was a little bit too tight when he threw the ball. So what happens when your base is tight, you're not balanced and you sail everything. So if you remember with Lamar, a lot of times when he threw over the middle or outside of the numbers, a lot of stuff was sailed over the heads of a lot of his targets. And that strictly was a base thing with him. With Milroe, I just think he needs more reps as a passer, just because the body construction is a little bit different. He's not as loose of a thrower, in my opinion, as what Lamar was. He's a little bit stiffer in that aspect just because he has a lot more muscle than what Lamar does as far as his body composition. So I think with Jalen, it's just reps with him and just understanding how to be more looser as a passer. With Lamar, it was more so of a base and how tight his base was coming out of Louisville.
No. Again, the Jaden Daniels in Washington, obviously the success of Lamar Jackson. I'd be shocked if somebody doesn't go Jalen Milroe in the first and say, hey, we're going all in. Whether I'm banking my job on it, a franchise owner, GM says, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is the plan with what we have. I mean, it is hard not to imagine that scenario because
Can I give you a team you'd be perfect on?
Oh, let's hear it.
The Steelers. The Steelers is the team that
Man.
I would circle for him just because you have Justin Fields, who's a free agent, Russell Wilson, who they could resign for a year or two. And that allows you some leeway for Milroe to develop as a passer. And I think about that power run-based scheme that they want to run. Jalen Milroe is a Mike Tomlin type of quarterback of where he wants to run the ball, but also incorporate some passes in between as well. I think about the AFC North. He has the body composition to that tough, rugged type of football and the type of attitude that the Steelers have. I think it'd be a perfect fit in Pittsburgh. Now, is that in the first round? I don't know. If it's in the second round, I don't know. But just talking about team fit, I think the Pittsburgh Steelers would be a great fit for him.
Yeah, I love the fit. And again, Jalen Milroe, I would be shocked if he gets out of the first round. Again, a team, and it becomes that late. If he's sitting there in the late 20s, somebody's jumping back up to get him as a developmental guy. Again, your Steelers, whoever it is down the road. Is there any other quarterback that should be in this conversation that, hey, is going to surprise us, is going to pop up, is going to end up on a radar?
The only one would be Aller, in my opinion. We've talked about him already, but if he does end up declaring, I think he's one that could climb significantly throughout the process.
Perfect. Well, quarterback, there's no consensus. There's nobody that's truly separated themselves, but there are two players who, I mean, they've basically been the two best players in college football for, if not this entire year, most of this year. And we're talking Travis Hunter at CU, Ashton Jeanty at Boise State. Again, if you talk Ashton, he is by far the most dominant player at his position. It is fun to watch him. He makes it look easy. Travis Hunter, again, he's really fun to watch at wide receiver. He's really fun to watch at corner. Before we talk specifics about their draft profile, Jordan, do you have a Heisman vote?
No, I do not have one.
All right, so you can truly tell us who's getting your Heisman vote between these two players.
It would be Travis Hunter, just because the things that he's doing,
It's the right answer, Rodrik. It's
Not
the right
answer, Neil.
The things that he's doing at two positions is something that we have not seen really since Chris Gamble is one example that I can think of, and then also Champ Bailey when he was coming out of Georgia. Those are your two full-time two-way players from my vantage point anyway. I'm only 33 years old, so I don't remember anybody before.
That's an impressive callback, Champ Bailey, man. I like it.
But that's actually been my comparison for Travis Hunter. And I know it's unfair to him to compare him to Hall of Fame players, but just talking about the two-way versatility that he does have, and not only playing it, but also being dominant at both of those spots.
Yeah.
So Jordan, that's an important point. Now, when we had Dane on a couple weeks ago, another draft expert that we respect, and there are not many that we do, he said not only is he CB1, he's potentially wide receiver 1 as well. Would you subscribe to that? Do you feel like if he were to say, I'm not playing cornerback on the next level, he's still potentially your first wide receiver off the board and potentially the top player in the draft?
Yeah, I mean, he's my top player in the draft, and I don't think it's close.
Even as a wide receiver?
Yeah, as a wide receiver or corner. Like I've been telling everybody that asked me this question, just get him in the building and we'll figure it out from there. He's one of those type of players of we're going to try him at both and see which one he's more comfortable at. And if he wants to go two ways, then let him go. Just because what I loved, and I think he's going to be excellent in pre-draft interviews, what he said I loved. And he said, I love people telling me what I can't do. And when he was coming into Colorado, a lot of people were saying he's not going to be able to play 100-plus snaps two ways, and he was able to do it. Coming into the NFL, and I'm a doubter as well, I will say that. I just don't think he's going to be able to play full-time both ways. He loves and he thrives off of people criticizing him. So he's one of those players. And once again, we all know the draft is all about just getting players in the building. And you want to draft players that you know that you're going to hit on. And Travis Hunter is one of those players that I feel strongly is going to be I think he's going to be a star in the NFL, whether it's at a receiver position or a corner position. Let's just get him in the building and we'll just figure it out from there. Now, in my personal opinion, I would play him at corner full time, and I would have a package of 15 to 20 plays for him at wide receiver, whether it's as a wide receiver 2 or wide receiver 3. I graded him as a corner. He's my top ranked corner. He's also my top ranked receiver, and he's my top ranked player in the NFL draft. But let's say if Jacksonville isn't comfortable with trading back, or they don't like the haul of picks that teams are offering them to trade up for a quarterback, I would be comfortable taking Hunter at number 1 overall.
Is he an X? Is he a Y? Is he a slot? Where is he best? I haven't even seen Colorado play this year. Where does his skill set fit best as a wide receiver, Jordan?
All of the above.
Okay.
I think he's that special.
That's
He plays
special.
in the slot. He plays in the slot for him. He plays outside for him, and they run him on a variety of different routes. Now, is he a polished route runner? Not by any stretch of the imagination, but as far as his athleticism, he's able to get away with a lot of stuff. But, we have to remember that, and this is based off what Coach Prime was saying throughout the year, he's not even practicing full time throughout the week. So he hasn't been able to really fine tune some of the details and the nuances of playing the position. So imagine what happens when he's practicing full time and he's getting NFL coaching, whether it's at receiver or corner or even both positions, of how good he can just be on the next level.
Yeah, that mental aspect, again, is one of the things that Dane Brugler talked about really separates him. Again, he is going to be able to do it all. He's mentally checked in. He's tough. He can be physical. He tackles. Again, one of those things that not even Prime could brag about off of his Hall of Fame playing career. But again, he can do it all. He's going to be special. You find a way to get him in packages. There's 2 corners, Travis Hunter, Will Johnson. They have separated themselves. Talk about the comparison between these two, because Will Johnson, again, he's one of those guys that makes playing corner look easy a lot of times, and that can be one of the greatest compliments you give to these top players is, man, he just makes it look easy. It's almost a little boring sometimes putting their film on because, again, it's fluid. He's in and out of breaks. He's in phase. He can do that. Compare, obviously, a polished full-time corner in Will Johnson to Travis Hunter, and kind of what separates, again, Travis Hunter being corner 1 for you.
It's just the technique aspect of it. Honestly, I think Johnson plays with more technique, based on his back pedal, his movements, and then just understanding offensive concepts and what routes are trying to be ran against him. He looks much more polished in that aspect. With Travis, it's much more of just everything is reactionary and reacting off of routes, playing in man coverage. Now, his zone instincts, I think, are really, really good. And I think that comes from him playing as a wide receiver. He understands some of the routes and the concepts, and then just reading the eyes of the quarterback. But as far as just strictly man coverage, I think Johnson is more polished in that aspect as far as playing with technique, staying in and out of phase, and then just breaking on the ball. I think those are some separators with him. And, Johnson reminds me, and I don't think he's quite as good of a prospect, but they're very similar body type wise as Patrick Surtain II when he was coming out of Alabama. And if you remember, he just was one of those corners that just had a boring game just because he was so good. So I think both of those guys are very comparable. Now, I'll say it again. I don't think Johnson is as good of a prospect as Surtain, but just from a play style and body composition standpoint, I think they're very similar.
Yeah, well, Stratton has been one of the best corners since he's been a rookie, so that is some high praise there, and tells you, again, a loaded defensive class where that first corner, again, your first true corner, take Travis Hunter out of the conversation. Again, he's a top 10 pick, and again, depending on where these quarterbacks end up going, a top 5 pick. Let's flip it over and compare Travis now to, I would say there's 3 wide receivers, Travis Hunter, Tetairoa McMillan out of Arizona, and Luther Burden at Missouri. You've got a variety of different styles here. Again, it almost goes back to the Harrison Jr., Malik Neighbors, Rome Odunze conversation, where you got 3 guys that have really separated themselves, 3 really different styles. Compare Travis's, again, you already mentioned the route running, the ball skills are there. Talk about those 3 guys and kind of how you rank and compare them.
Yeah, I'll just start with the 2 guys we haven't talked about, McMillan and Burden. With McMillan, he's that big body ex-receiver that can go up and attack the ball out of the air, good route runner. But what I love about him is that those 50-50 balls out of the air, he's going to come down with those. And the player that he reminds me of is Drake London when he was coming out of USC. Very comparable body, really strong hands, can give you something after the catch. He's not a burner or anything like that, but he can take advantage of the yards that are there and gain it after the catch. But as far as one of those guys that can go up and get the ball and just snag it out of the air, I think he's able to do that. He's an outstanding run blocker, so he's not afraid to get his face dirty as a run blocker as well, whether it's in line or out on the perimeter. I think that's an added aspect of his game. That's why I have him as one of my top ranked wide receivers, and I think he has a chance to go inside of the top 15. Now, Burden is a little bit different from a body-wise standpoint. He'll probably come in at about 5'10 and a half, 5'11", 205 pounds. A very thick lower half. I was there when they played against South Carolina, and he got off to a slow start, but he made a great catch in the fourth quarter to bring them back in that game before they ultimately lost it down the backstretch. But he's more so of your get the ball in his hands really quickly, a yak guy, really strong after the catch, has a really strong body, kind of like in a Deebo Samuel type mold of where you just want to use him in so many different ways. I think he's going to be a slot on the next level. I think that's where you really want to play him just because you can take advantage of his skill set there, but he can bump outside. On some occasions, you don't want him there full time just because he doesn't really have the length like McMillan does. But I think he's going to be a high-end second option or wide receiver 2 on the next level, and there's nothing wrong with that. If you're a team that has a dominant wide receiver 1, using him as a complement, I think that's probably going to be a ceiling on the next level.
Well, that's fantastic. It's a good group. Again, a top 3. Again, is there who's wide receiver 4? Is there anybody else that is going to again drop a fast 40 or really impress through the process? It's going to get themselves into this conversation.
There's a couple guys that are in contention now. This isn't the high-end wide receiver guys that we have seen in years past. I just don't think there's any high-end guys like we've seen in previous years. But Isaiah Bond of Texas is one that I think could rise throughout the process. I've seen him frequently throughout the year. He's a blazer. I mean, if he doesn't run low to mid 4.3s, I would be shocked if he does run at the combine or his pro day or whatever he decides to do. He's had success at 2 high-end institutions. He was at Alabama first, where he had plenty of success, and then now at Texas. And even though the numbers are down a little bit, you still see a lot of those exciting plays from him. And then the other is Emeka Ibuka at Ohio State, who's another guy like Burden that's probably your high-end wide receiver 2 on the next level. He doesn't have a lot of A-plus or A-level traits, I would like to say, as far as explosion or anything like that, but tough, durable, understands how to catch the ball in any type of situations, really good against zone coverage, really savvy, and knows how to get open against man coverage. Very similar to a Jackson Smith and Jigba that came out a couple of years ago out of that scheme. They're nearly identical as far as who they can be on the next level.
Yeah.
Let's talk about tight ends. And it probably won't take very long in this class. Based on what I've seen, Colson Loveland seems to be the number 1 guy across the board. But Tyler Warren's come on strong as well from Penn State. Is there a chance that Warren can catch him? What's the difference between the two? Which one has a higher floor as well as a higher ceiling in your estimation?
Well, Warren's already caught him for me. Warren,
really?
Yeah,
okay.
Warren, he's exceptional, man. Like he can do everything you want. He's really thrived under their new offensive coordinator. You're seeing them use him so many different ways. He's at Wildcat. Sometimes you see the big play against USC he made down the field. I think he had like 17 catches for 250 plus yards in that game. Very tough, really durable, strong hands, can win against man, really good and understands how to find green grass against zone. He's a good blocker, even though they don't use him a whole bunch as a blocker. I think he has a lot of potential in that area, and I think that's where he really differentiates himself against Loveland. I think Loveland's the better receiver. He's a looser athlete, has better hands, and a better route runner. But if you're looking for that two-way threat or that dual threat, I think Warren is the better player. So it wouldn't surprise me at all if Warren ends up going ahead of Loveland. And I think Loveland has kind of been criticized a little bit more just because of the inconsistent quarterback play with Michigan. So we really haven't been able to see him have that breakout year like a lot of people were expecting with him now being that go-to option in that offense. But I just think Warren is the better overall player, but Loveland is the better overall receiver.
Okay.
It's been a lot of good. It's a good tight end class. It's not that, again, you don't have a Kyle Pitts, you don't have a unicorn in that first round, but you've got good, solid players really from top to bottom. Do we have are either of these guys first round tight ends, or do we have a bunch of day 2, early day 3 tight ends in this group?
So I actually think it's a good tight end class, guys. I think it's being very underrated right now. I think there's quite a bit of depth in it as well. Um, I think those two are probably, I would say, 20 to 40 range where they do end up going, depending on what happens throughout the pre-draft process. But there's some others that could rise. Mason Taylor at LSU, there's quite a bit of buzz about him. Jason
Mm-hmm.
Taylor's son, who's a good player. Elijah Arroyo at Miami, who just got invited and accepted his invitation to the Senior Bowl. I think he has a chance to rise quite a bit. Eli Stowers at Vanderbilt, he's another that's a bit of a sleeper. I think he's accepted the invitation to the Shrine Game. It wouldn't surprise me if the Senior Bowl doesn't end up reaching out to him as well. Gunnar Helm at Texas is another. And then Harold Fannin at Bowling Green, who I think is one of the better MAC players overall in this year's class. So just reeled off 6 or 7 or 8 names there right away. I think this is a very underrated tight end class overall. There's no Kyle Pitts or that type of player in this year's draft class, but early day 2 through the beginning stages of day 3, I think we could see a lot of tight ends come off of the board.
Yeah. Again, you see them used more and more in offenses across the NFL. Again, the Travis Kelce's, the Gronkowski's of the world. Again, it is a quarterback's best friend when they develop that rapport and everything. So it's good to see those guys. Another really good position group in maybe a position in the NFL that's regaining its importance is running backs. We've seen what Saquon's done. Obviously, he's just a different guy. Derrick Henry, again, just a different human being. But again, we've got my Heisman pick in Ashton Jeanty, who has kind of separated himself. But again, you've got Omarion Hampton at North Carolina, who was kind of running back one coming into the year, and a bunch of really good running backs across the country. Ohio State's got 2 of them that are going to get drafted. You've got Michigan that could have 2 drafted. Talk about that running back group as a whole. Is Ashton not only, a Heisman? Again, the Heisman committee should take 2 guys to New York. It's Hunter or Jeanty. Yeah. I don't think it's close after that. Again, is Jeanty your running back 1? Is Hampton next? Kind of talk about that group.
Yeah, so this is an exceptional running back class. I think it is by far the best position group outside of defensive line in this year's draft class. And I mean, you just reeled off 6 or 7 names already. And I mean, you didn't even say Caleb Johnson at Iowa, who's got a significant amount of buzz. Ollie Gordon at Oklahoma State, depending on what he does, if he comes back or if he does come out. And there's plenty of others, Jay Knott at Cal, and plenty of others too. So this is a really, really loaded running back class. And if you need a running back, this is the draft class to do it. But what I'm interested to see overall with this draft class is, does that keep teams, or does that force teams to shy away from taking Jeanty early on, whether it's top 15 or top 20? So that's something I'm going to be focusing on in this draft class, just because I think he's a first-round caliber of talent without question. But do you take a defensive lineman early on if you need one, and then do you come back and get an Omarion Hampton or a Caleb Johnson in the second round? So that's just something to watch in this draft class.
Yeah. Is there, again, in an NFL where Saquon, he can do it in the run, in the pass, he can jump over people backwards. Derrick Henry, again, true road grader downhill. I mean, all those names that you just mentioned, all these running backs, again, true 3-down guys. They can win on first and second down. They're good in the pass game. Maybe not. There's some of these guys that aren't quite as dynamic on the outside as pass catchers, but they can work really well in the screen game. Is the pass game for these teams that are sorting through these first and second tier guys, is that what's going to separate them, or is it a health? Is it a scheme? What do you think is going to separate any of these guys?
Well, I mean, those are things that are always factored, no matter what draft class we're talking about. You preferably want those guys that can give you value on third down. So if there's a player like somebody I think could go higher than expected is Travion Henderson of Ohio State, just because of his value in the passing game. And I think he's one of the better pass protecting blockers in this overall draft class. So those finer details and those small pluses on the scouting report could be something that catapults them ahead of some of these smaller running backs that just give you value in the receiving area. If you can't block, that's going to be something that obviously is going to be knocked throughout the pre-draft process. So there's going to be a lot of things that really differentiate these guys. And if you're a running back in this class, I would heavily advise you do everything at the combine, just because with this being such a loaded class, there's going to be every single variable taken into the equation. And teams are going to want every data point, just because it is such a loaded draft class, to really differentiate these guys into different types of tiers.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let's kick it back over to the defensive side. Let's talk about
Before we do,
Neil's going to get me.
I
What you
warned
got,
y'all in
Neil?
advance. We got to talk about offensive line. Will
There we
Campbell
go.
came in as
Yeah.
a tackle as number one. Okay. Again, going back to Dane was pretty clear he hasn't seen what he expected to see from Campbell this year. Do you see him as the number one tackle? And if so, who are some tackles that could threaten him for that status in this draft class?
Yeah, so I actually have Campbell graded as a guard. I actually
Okay.
like him better inside just because some of the power rushers and some of the length that he has faced, he has struggled. And even though, the sack numbers are always going to look great with Campbell just because he doesn't give up a lot of sacks. But when he does give up pressure, it's predominantly to those power guys or ones that do have a lot of length, which is what he's going to face in the NFL. And if you remember, going back to when he faced Jared Verse and Dallas Turner and guys like that, he did have quite a bit of struggles against those guys. And that's no knock against him. Can he play tackle in the NFL? Yes. I think he could be a starter. But as far as him having or getting more bang for your buck or having more value and being a better player, I think he would be a better guard. And the player that I actually wrote on my report as his comparison was Samuel Cosmi when he was coming out of Texas. And if you remember Cosmi, he was a great tackle when he was at Texas. But the one thing that he did struggle with was when guys did bull rush him going straight down his chest, those power rushers, and then ones that did threaten his upfield shoulder or his upfield hip, I should say, and guys that could get up the field quickly on him. But if you put him inside at guard, you could negate a lot of those things, and he could take advantage of his power. I think Will Campbell has outstanding power, and I think he's a great run blocker. But those guys that can threaten him up the field, those are really where you see a lot of his deficiencies taking place. And Cosmi's turned into a great player in Washington. I think they just gave him a second contract, to be one of the more hefty paid guards in the NFL. So that's no knock against Campbell. Can he play tackle in the NFL? Yes, I think he can be a starter, but I think he would be a higher quality player as a guard on the next level. And we've seen this before. Peter Skoronski of Northwestern is one that comes to mind. Cosmi is another that comes to mind as well. So there's a lot of players that did play tackle in college, but they could be better suited as guards. But just to answer the second part of your question, Neil, some players I think could threaten to be the first tackle, taking Kelvin Banks of Texas. That's obviously an obvious name. Another, we'll see if he does end up coming out, that I thought was gaining a bit of steam is Josh Simmons at Ohio State. He did unfortunately tear his ACL in that Oregon game, but I thought he was showing a lot of promise that could potentially catapult him to being a top 15 or 20 pick. And another is Ariante Ursary, the big tackle at Minnesota. The Senior Bowl is going to be a big test for him, but I can see a lot of teams falling in love with his length and his overall upside.
Yeah, Ursary is a player that, again, he stood out, again, just in terms of the traits, in terms of, again, Will Campbell kind of is, again, not a finished product. Nobody's ever finished, but again, you can really see what he's going to be. Josh Simmons, again, you got to go back and watch a lot of old tape. Ursary, it's like, man, you just put the film on it. Again, he just looks different. He looks like he's going to play on the outside in the NFL, where, again, Campbell, maybe not. Again, Kelvin Banks, all right, which side do you want him on? Again, that you start having all those conversations. Then you start factoring, again, are we a power zone scheme? Do we want him to get outside and run, or do we want him to stay inside tight and get downhill? Again, all the conversations that are really fun as teams really start to go through the process and do their work on these guys, which is, again, the next 141 days. All right, Neil, can we talk about edges now? Can we talk about defense? Get this offensive stuff out of the way.
I've been waiting for, I saved you a little bit of time to talk about edge. Go.
Good. All right, so edge rushers. Again, I would say most teams, quarterback is one, edge rusher, you have to have those guys. Again, another position where if you can do it even situationally on third down, you're going to end up being a first-round pick because you can rush the passer, the value in that. Abdul Carter, has he separated himself? Is he easily edge one in this group now?
Yeah, he's a stud, man. Like the explosiveness, the length that he has, just the effort that he plays with, the closing speed, the burst. He's everything that you want at the position. Now, he doesn't have, as far as like the density that some of the other guys have on his body in this draft class, but as far as the explosiveness, he's going to be one of those dudes that scouts are going to be turning to each other when they're in the stands at Lucas Oil Stadium with some of the numbers that he puts up. Like, it wouldn't surprise me if he runs in the low 4.4s or high 4.3s with his 40. He could jump 38 plus in the vertical. He could broad 10.8 plus. That wouldn't surprise me. Like, his numbers are going to be freaky. And he plays that exact way on tape. Now, the transition from off-ball linebacker to edge did take a little bit longer than what I thought it would. It took him about 3 or 4 games. And if I remember, the Illinois game is the one, which was the 3rd or 4th game of the season for Penn State, is really where the light started to turn on for him. And they still use him in a variety of ways. You still see him play stack backer on late downs and those 3rd down situations, those obvious passing downs, which I think is only going to help him in the NFL with that versatility. But as far as the upside that he has, I think it's phenomenal. Like, it would not surprise me if he ends up being a top 5 pick, especially if he does do some of the testing at the combine. I think he's going to put up some freaky numbers.
Again, in that same vein, a guy that is a little less dense but is going to put up some freaky test numbers is James Pierce at Tennessee.
Yeah.
And a guy that, again, kind of whoever was edge one, again, this guy was in that conversation coming in. He has not maybe taken those steps number-wise, production-wise, as Abdul Carter has. But again, you put on if you want to just watch highlights and what a guy can be, James Pierce may be your guy because of what he can do. Does he come out? Is he ready to be a first-round prospect, and how high is his ceiling?
He's your classic case of a pressures over production player. That's what I like to label him as. Like, he's going to get a million pressures throughout a game, but you would like to see him finish a little bit more than what he does. And he had a better year last year than what he's put on tape this year, in my opinion, just because it's just a bunch of pressures and not a lot of finishing with him. But the debate in draft rooms with him is going to be, how confident are you with him against the run? Just because I think he's inconsistent in that aspect. And if you're inconsistent as a run defender, you simply can't play on those early down situations. So I compare him to a guy like, and I think he's a better prospect, but a guy like Nolan Smith when he was coming out of Georgia. And Nolan has come on here a bit late throughout the season, his 2nd year, I believe it is now. But the big worry about Nolan is, yes, he's a fantastic pass rusher, but can we play him on those early down situations, just because he's just not sustainable right now early on in his career as a run defender. So I think you have to have a distinct plan for Pierce, especially early on in his career, whether that's, protecting him as a stand-up outside linebacker in a 3-4 scheme, or just playing him on those late down situations where you can use him as a pass rusher. And then once you get his body caught up and you add some more pounds on him, 2, 3, 4 years to the latter part of his rookie contract, then you give him a full-time role. I think that's something that you really have to do with him. So you have to protect him a little bit and have a distinct plan for him. Now, do I think he can be a full-time player early on? I don't think so, just because of his body composition or lack thereof. Just because I think you're going to be asking him to do a little bit too much from a run defense aspect and then be a pass rush specialist. But, he's probably going to go to a team, 20 to 25 range if I had to guess right now. Now, if he does end up testing, he'll probably end up going higher than that, just because, like with Carter, he's going to put up some freaky numbers. But I think for him, what would be best for him is to go to a rotation that is already deep in the NFL, so he can be that 2nd or 3rd guy off of the bench, and he's not forced into a full-time role right away.
Yeah, again, one of those guys.
What's your take on Michael Williams? What's your take on Nick Scorton? Are they more prepared, ready for the game, maybe than a James Pierce?
So Michael actually was my top-ranked player coming into the year, and I was all in on betting on the traits with him, just because. And I think I posted a clip of when they played Clemson in the season opener. Like, guys, if you see this guy in person, like, he's going to have 35-plus inch arms. He's every bit of 6'5", 270. And so I go on the field. Rodrik, you know this as a former scout. You go on the field, you see these guys pregame. He's out there with the punt returners, returning punts in pregame. So that just goes to show you how athletic this guy is. And the player that he looks exactly like is Danielle Hunter when he was coming out of LSU. And with Danielle, the big worry with Danielle is that could he ever figure it out as a pass rusher? Could his traits catch up, or could the production catch up to the traits that he shows? And if you take Michael in the first round, you're hoping that the traits could eventually lead to production, just because if you just look at the box score, it's not going to be impressive with Michael. He's never had a season of where he's at over 4.5 sacks. But if you turn on the tape, you see the pressures, you see the traits. He just oozes with traits. And then you combine that with the size. I can see a team falling in love and being hopeful that he could eventually be a Danielle Hunter type of player. And Danielle even went in the third round. That's not to say that Michael is going to be in the third round. That's not going to happen. But as far as just falling in love with the traits and eventually hoping that leads to production, I can see a team definitely falling in love with that. Now with Scorton, very different body type. He's more so kind of like a Keon White when he was coming out of Georgia Tech. That thick, dense build. He can play any technique up front. Really good with his hands. Plays very explosive as well. I thought the Purdue tape was a little bit better than this year. I thought he got off to a slow start this year, in my honest opinion, but he's played much better midway and now through the end of the season. You would like to see him flash a little bit more than what he did, especially early on in the season. But as far as like the strength that he has, I think he's ready right away. He's more ready than Michael to play 3 downs, in my opinion, right away.
Yeah. Yeah, I've struggled with Michael. Again, the traits absolutely stand out, but again, like you said, I'm always left wanting more. Again, I'm going to just press pause and look at the beautiful body type, the long arms. And again, for me, and maybe it's a Georgia thing, I was the low guy on Darnell Washington coming out. Again, the traits are otherworldly. Again, first off the bus guy, but again, in the NFL now, he's still maybe 2 or 3 receptions a game, and he's kind of that specific role player where if the production ever catch up to the traits, again, you're gonna gamble on that. You're gonna take that player at a certain point. Again, certain franchises maybe also have the ability to take the chance on that player based on where their roster is, which is always usually the best spot for those guys to go is, hey, I'm not going to ask you to do too much right now. I'm going to give you some time to kind of continue to grow into it. Pittsburgh is a perfect spot for that for Darnell. And again, he's going to hopefully continue to grow into it as kind of tight into, again, hopefully Michael kind of ends up in that situation. You plug him in, you've got to be edge number 1 for us and be our premier guy. Good luck. Again, hopefully you're not on a new team in a couple of years, because again, it seems more often than not, that's where those kinds of guys go. Franchise matters. Again, it doesn't matter what position it is, franchise fit, it all matters. Before we wrap up here, again, we've only touched on a number of positions. Who are some guys at any other position, like, man, I just love watching this player? Again, he could be at number 4, 5, 6 at his position, something we didn't talk about. Who's a guy you just want to put on? You just get lost watching his film.
Oh man, how much time do we have? I got a lot of guys this year. One for me who I think could be a starting nickel right away is Jeanty Barron at Texas. He's a player that has been there a long time at Texas, it seems like. And a lot of people thought he was going to come out last year, and I think he could have been one of the first nickels taken in last year's draft. But just the toughness, the durability that he plays with, the football IQ that he has. I think he has 4 or 5 interceptions so far this year. And, I've called 2 Texas games, like I said, Mississippi State and Kentucky. I mean, he just flashes every single time you see that defense plays, and they're very good in the secondary. But the one player that just constantly pops up is Jeanty Barron. And I would be shocked if he's not a starting nickel as early on as a rookie, in my opinion. I think he has that type of skill set. I think he's one of those players that I call it CAA, come as advertised. He's one of those players that comes as advertised, and he's one of those players that I think could play right away. And then another is linebacker Jahad Campbell at Alabama. I was there for the LSU game, and it's one of the most impressive performances I've seen of any defensive player so far this year. I think he had 12 tackles, like 2 sacks, a forced fumble. He was everywhere in that one. And he's still relatively raw as far as playing in the box. I think he's a will linebacker on the next level, but he's another player that can rush off of the edge. He's every bit of 6'3", 240, 245 pounds. But as far as the upside that he has, it wouldn't surprise me if he's the first linebacker off of the board and maybe go late first, early second round. And he's going to be a freaky tester as well. So Jahad Campbell and Jeanty Barron, those are 2 players. If I was in the draft room, I definitely would pound the table for.
Good. So you had 2 defensive players. Last year we saw, top 13, 14, all on the offensive side of the ball. Everything feels like it's about the exact opposite, but we know quarterbacks will be ruled that out. Again, take Travis Hunter off the board because, again, he'll be wide receiver / corner taken Are we going to see a heavy defensive first half of the first round, do you think? Or, again, through the process, offensive players, it's an offensive game. Those guys are going to get it pushed up to where it's more of a 50-50 first half of the first round.
Yeah, I think so. Just because when you look at the top of the draft, it's usually filled with quarterbacks, tackles, edge rushers, and sometimes cornerbacks. And I think you could put defensive tackles in that premium position, a premium equation now, in my honest opinion. And if you look at it, those two offensive positions we just talked about, it's not a great quarterback class and it's not a great offensive tackle class, in my opinion, as far as high-end guys like we saw last year. I don't think there's no Joe Alt or anybody like that in this draft class. So because of that, with it being a lower level quarterback and offensive tackle class, now you're going to see those edge rushers, those interior guys, and maybe some corners even pushed up the board because of that, just because there isn't a lot of high-end talent at quarterback or offensive tackle.
Yeah. Well, I was betting after last year's that, again, it's going to be more the norm, that it's going to be an offensive heavy first 10 picks of the NFL draft. But again, the players, the calibers, again, teams are always going to take the top players. And if they're on defense, hopefully they come off the board, and some really good players. So Jordan, you're at Jordan_Reid on Twitter. What kind of list? You have an updated top 50, top 100 coming out. What's on the calendar for you coming up that people can pay attention to?
Yeah, so I have my top 50 coming out in 2 weeks, which is something that I love to do, putting that together. And it really gives you an overview of this draft class as a whole, really through, early day two, I would say, of where the ebbs and flows of this draft class could go. And then also we have our positional rankings coming out every single week. And we have a big scouting notebook coming out this week as well, especially with the conference championships coming up. Just some key players to keep an eye on, and some guys that you could hear their names called early, and even some late round gems that could be playing in these games too.
Awesome. Well, I know I'll be paying attention to it. Neil will be paying attention to it. And if you're not already following him, I'd be shocked if you're listening to this, you're not already following. Make sure you head over to X, check him out at Jordan_Reid. Obviously, all your stuff up on ESPN.
Thank you guys as always. It's always a pleasure. Love talking ball with you guys.
Before we go, agents, make sure you head over and check out Agent Live 360. It is the all-in-one CRM for your agency. NIL, SRAs, keeping up to date on every class you have coming up, or, the ones in your past, all right there at your fingertips. Sign up for a demo and I will take you through it. Or you can sign up using code TRIAL90 at checkout for a 3-month trial of the entire software. That is just $10 a month. That is Agent Live 360. Head over to agentlive360.com. It is the CRM you need. From the NFL draft back to the college side of the world, we will head to James Madison and talk personnel with Nathan Applebaum, DPP there. One of the premier programs in the Sun Belt, dealing with NIL landscape, competing on a national level, and the transition from school to school. Lots of good stuff with Nathan in that one. So get that college palette refreshed again and jump in. Make sure you set your reminders for that one. On today's episode, what did we miss? What did we miss on these prospects? Make sure you let us know at RightStepADV and at Inside the League. We love the feedback, criticism, or whatever else you want to throw out there. Make sure you let us know. I can promise you Neil and I can deal with it. 141 days. It is going to go in a flash, but before then, we still have the college football playoff, NFL playoffs, all-star games, the combine, free agency, and so much more. Football is a year-round thing, and so are we. Here at Scouting the League, we will keep scouting.